What ultimately helped break this stalemate was French intervention. The French monarchy had supported the revolution from the beginning with supplies and money, but had hesitated to become more involved. Understandably, the monarch was reluctant to support a republican experiment which proposed to demonstrate that people did not need kings. Perhaps even more importantly, they didn't want to back the losing side, and it appeared to most people that British strength would win out in the end. Then, in 1777, an American army finally defeated a British army in a stand-up fight at Saratoga, in a convincing demonstration of their determination to win. The following year, France formally declared war and began sending troops. The final battle of the war took place in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia, where a joint American-French army, backed by the French Navy, forced the surrender of a British army under Lord Cornwallis. Weary of the long and expensive war, the British agreed to American independence, and in 1783 formalized the end of the struggle with the Peace of Paris. Great Britain gave up its claim to the 13 colonies, but retained Canada and their possessions in the West Indies. Louisiana Territory, west of Mississippi, was ceded to Spain. The British also promised to withdraw its troops from its military outposts in the Northwest, while the United States agreed to honor their debts to British merchants. The war had been won and independence secured. In many ways, however, it was an incomplete revolution. The Declaration of Independence had stressed lofty ideals such as the equality of all men, the right of men to be secure in their property, and the right to pursue happiness. The revolutionaries had stressed that they were fighting against the slavery which King George had sought to impose upon them. But did the newly created republic truly embody these ideals? An obvious inconsistency can be found in the perpetuation of African American slavery. During the war, some African Americans had responded to British promises of freedom and joined them as soldiers and laborers. At the end of the war, these promises proved to be ephemeral, as most of these loyalists were left behind to be re-enslaved. Other free African Americans joined the rebel cause, hoping to achieve liberty both for their country and for their compatriots in slavery. These hopes continued following the end of hostilities. Petitions from African Americans aimed at the new government stressed the revolutionary ideology of freedom. As one group of Philadelphia slaves wrote, quote, "Every principle from which America has acted in the course of their unhappy difficulties with Great Britain pleads stronger than 1,000 arguments in favor of our petition." Unquote. These appeals did have a significant impact upon the North. Pennsylvania passed a law stipulating that all newborn blacks were to be freed at age 28, and other states passed similar measures of gradual emancipation. Within 50 years, the institution of slavery had been eliminated in the North. For a while, it seemed this might also happen in the South. A key reason Northerners had been more willing to relinquish this institution had been its relative unimportance to their economy. This had not been the case in the South, where plantations grew labor-intensive crops. In the Chesapeake, however, the economic importance of slavery was waning. Tobacco, long the staple commercial crop of the region, had been declining in value for some time. Thus, while Virginia and Maryland failed to completely abolish slavery, they did loosen up the provisions for voluntarily emancipating slaves, anticipating a future when this institution would vanish. As a result, the free black population of this region grew dramatically after the war. Women likewise received mixed benefits from the Revolution. During the struggle, women had demonstrated their ability to play a role in politics, particularly in their contributions to the economic boycotts of the pre-war era. Following the war, many people further argued that the Republic would only survive if women took up the responsibility of training their sons in proper Republican virtues. Yet while women were supposed to indirectly support the new form of government within their families, their public role changed not at all. Women did not receive the vote, nor did their legal status significantly change. For Native Americans, the war had been a disaster. Many tribes, such as the Iroquois and the Cherokee, had been physically devastated by the fighting. and the new American government essentially assumed that all the tribes east of the Appalachians were now conquered peoples, although not all of them had actually supported the British. While the Revolution had been a triumph for American freedom, its consequences were in many ways the exact opposite for Native Americans. For many ordinary Americans, the war also brought problems. The backcountry had been devastated by the conflict with Native Americans, and many families throughout the country suffered from the deaths of fathers and sons. Economically, poorer folk often bore a heavy burden from the disruptions of the war and the uncertain finances of the new government. Those who had accepted Continental paper dollars saw their value dwindle rapidly, leading them to sell them for pennies on the dollar to speculators. The Continental Army was almost in open revolt by the end of the war because of Congress's failure to pay the troops or come through with promised benefits. Yet the Revolution undoubtedly did benefit ordinary Americans. The revolt had been, in no small part, that of colonial elites struggling to maintain their traditional positions of authority against British encroachments. They fully expected that the post-war society would be essentially like colonial society prior to the French and Indian War, with these elites comfortably in charge. What they had not anticipated was how fully ordinary Americans would absorb the lessons of equality and the ideological implications of the Revolution. In this new order, deference to authority was profoundly eroded, regardless of whether the source of that authority lay in distant Britain or in the local plantation manor.